Okay, sorry about that, everyone. We ran out of time on our Zoom meeting there, so we hooked up again, and we're just going to add this on, and so we're live again. And go ahead, Jay. You were making a point.
Sure. Yeah. So, Reed, you were talking about uh, using basically theoretical understanding of biological processes to make decisions. I think I guess I'm not against thinking theoretically. Of course, it's quite useful, but there's a really important check that's needed in terms of these theories. You have to have some empirical, some high quality empirical analogs to it in order to see if the theory is actually right. Um,
Yes,
and if the theory disagrees with the empirics, then the empirics are right.
correct.
So I think the issue here is like we were talking about asymptomatic transmission. The issue is uh, you see the asymptomatic transmission occur in, for instance, in contact tracing studies. You have to have then go back and say, okay, which of these theories are right? I mean, you have a theory about why asymptomatic transmission might occur with these ORF sequences. Um, that's certainly plausible theory to me. To me, from a policy point of view, from a epidemiological point of view, the key thing is, does it occur? Not why does it occur? And then once you know that it occurs, then you can make some policy questions. It's an interesting scientific question about why it occurs. But the way you do that, way you assess empirically is by, you assess the quality of empirical evidence. If you just have case
Yeah,
studies, it's going to be much less reliable than if you have high quality randomized trials, or in this case the asymptomatic spread. What you want is high quality contact tracing studies or meta-analyses of them.
right.
I mean, that's the right empirical test for whether it occurs. Why it occurs is interesting, but a priori reasoning not grounded in empirical data often goes astray, I think.
Yeah, because well, yeah, this certainly does. I made the point in this section of the book about Einstein just doing thought experiments in his head, and he came up with the general theory of relativity without any data at all.
Yeah,
And
but the reason why he's still well known and well loved now is because there were several empirical tests of
yes,
the general theory
right.
that turned out to be true. And it
Yeah,
was, like the years and years and years after he had the theory, those empirical tests failed to falsify them.
right.
That's why, and those were like surprising predictions that turned out to be true when conducted by independent people with high quality empirical work. That is why Einstein is famous for his general theory. If one of those empirical tests had shown the general theory to be wrong,
Right.
then no one would
Everybody would
remember.
have forgotten him by now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, but I guess what bothered me about it was people now are still saying that we never did a randomized trial on masks in children or something. And we don't need to. Masks don't work for anybody, let alone, I mean, children would be worse than an adult because they put them around their chin immediately, you know? You know what
I
I'm
mean,
saying? In other
I
words, they
think
would be,
so. Like the problem with okay, so I've also said that we don't have any randomized trials in masking children. Like if you're thing is that you have the society-wide medical intervention that you could, in principle, do a test on a high
yeah,
quality randomized trial. A
sure.
lot of people that are arguing for it basically don't want to do it. They disagree with you on the theory. They think masks are highly effective in stopping an aerosolized respiratory virus.
Yeah,
A
there's
lot of
still
very
people who think that.
Yes. And so there's a lot of prominent people who think that. So you have a scientific dispute on the theory. You
Yeah,
resolve it by a high quality empirical test.
right.
Now, I agree with you. I mean, it doesn't, the story that these folks who think the masks are effective generally for a aerosolized respiratory virus are just, they don't understand the physics.
That's right.
But but I don't think that I can persuade them with that, because they clearly have some physical process in mind, unspecified, that they have in their head, that making them say the masks work. Well, let's check. Let's do an empirical test.
Yeah.
That's why the call for a randomized trial. because there's this dispute among scientists about whether this particular intervention will work or not.
Correct. You know, when I felt like I figured this out without trials. And so when the Bangladesh study came out, and a lot of people thought that it showed a little bit of efficacy. I don't know where you came down on that, but I was sure that it had to have flaws in it because it showed a little bit of efficacy, and I know there isn't any. So when I actually looked at the way they did the trial design, it was obvious the mistake they made. And I never heard it before, but the problem is they were picking villages to have the masks or not have them, you know, and compare them. And I can tell you, living in a third world country, when a organization comes into town, is going to be giving away even something as inexpensive as masks, there's going to be a lot of people that show up just to get the free stuff. And when people have the motivation of only going to the trial to participate because they can get some free different colored masks, for example, they're not going to be that motivated to report their symptoms, because all they wanted was the masks. You follow me?
Yeah,
So
I mean,
that's a biased village.
They had so they tried to like address that first by like I mean, like basically going to the homes of a lot of these people and trying to, and they actually got antibody levels for people. And then they used police inside the villages, the mass villages, to enforce masking. So they try to address some of these things.
I think that oh, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. My point was a little different than that. I think that the participants wore the masks, but because their main motivation was to get the free stuff, I don't think that they're as likely to go back to the center and report symptoms, because they only got in the study because they wanted the different color masks.
So the way they would,
pink and orange masks.
I think that what they did read is that it's not that they waited for people to report symptoms. They went and asked them over this past month or whatever, 2 months period, whatever it was, did you have symptoms? So they went back and systematically checked with the people that that they sampled. So I don't think the major problem with that study is I actually think it's a pretty well-designed study, but I think the major problem with it is that the way that they conducted the statistical analysis, it hid the fact that that their results were consistent with no effect whatsoever. That zero effect was quite possible. They found nothing on cloth masks. On surgical masks, they found a very tiny effect, which is like something like I forget, like 9%.
Yeah,
I mean, just a very small efficacy. And then if you account for statistical sampling errors, you can actually, it's consistent with no effect at all.
Yeah.
Or it could be 18%, but the point is, even if it's like 18%, you have an intervention that doesn't stop transmission.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
And it's highly ineffective. It actually may cause people who are vulnerable. You're wearing a mask, you're like very confident that you're protected when you're not. At best, that the study says 18%. The Danmark study found nothing. So and then you go out in public with something that doesn't protect. It's like wearing a sock over your face.
It's like thinking you have a football helmet on when you're playing football when you don't.
Let me put it this way.
You think it's protective, but you don't have any protection really from it. It ends up causing death.
The analogy that some people who advocate for masks use is like parachutes. Right? You don't need a randomized trial to test a parachute. No one's going to jump out of a plane, at 30,000 feet without a parachute, or if they do, they won't survive. We know that for a physical fact. We don't need a randomized trial. They say, well, look, the physics of masks are such that obviously it will work. But
obviously it will work or won't.
Yeah, that's will work. That's what the people who advocate for masks say. Well, but if that's right, then this trial should have shown near 100% benefit. I mean, really, really high benefit, and it didn't.
Right.
The Danmark trial showed nothing.
Yeah.
If you go back before the pandemic, there were a dozen randomized trials in a wide variety of settings on masks and prevention of the flu, which transmits in very similar ways. And all of them found no effect or very low
Yeah.
effect.
Oh, I found 72 years of meta-analyses of randomized controlled trials, and in not a single one did it show a significant effect. 72 years worth. In other words, we've been doing this for a long time.
Yeah, so
Not
I think, I
just
mean,
this year.
there's a reason why we never recommended in public health masking
Yeah.
as a way to stop the spread of respiratory viruses that are spread by aerosols. It doesn't make any,
Yeah.
it doesn't match the empirical evidence. The physical reasoning leads you to think it wouldn't work. So why would you recommend it? Right. So
Yeah.
I think the key thing here is not the theoretical reasoning. I guess I could disagree with you about this, Reed. The theoretical reasoning is useful and important so to generate hypotheses, but you actually really do need high quality empirical studies to nail the issue.
Mhm. But just I agree with that. Again, it's a thing where that quote I put in one of my videos about Dr. Feynman talking about it doesn't matter how beautiful your theory is or how smart it was. If it disagrees with experience, it's wrong. So
Yeah.
I agree with you that you have to test these things. But sometimes you don't need a long test to show it, to explain it, and to really to prove it. You don't need it. Like, for example, I made the cheeky example here. If I asked you, if you go up on a roof with 100 bricks and you let go of all of them over the roof, are they all going to go down, or some going to go up and some going to go sideways? Well, already they're all going to go down.
I mean, Reed, I mean,
So you don't need to do the
you
experiment.
know, I agree with you about the physics of this mass, right? The issue is
Yeah.
that there are other people,
Yeah,
prominent
right.
people who disagree with us on the physics of it.
Yeah, I see. Yeah. Okay. And then the way to convince them is to do the study very well and show them that it
Yeah.
demonstrates what we're saying.
Yeah.
Now, but
That's-
we still can't convince some of these people though, because think of the graphs this year just of cases versus time. When places implemented masks, the graphs did not change.
I mean,
That
I
alone is
I mean,
proof.
there are people whose minds are blocked,
Yeah.
right? They're not doing science. They're not thinking scientifically.
Yeah.
But there may be others. There may be people who are thinking scientifically who would be persuaded by high quality empirical evidence, right? That's why you do it. There are always going to be people who they think dogmatically, are not willing to be moved by empirical evidence.
Yeah.
But that's not a reason not to do it.
Yeah. I mean, listen, I'm convinced that just from the theoretical side, masks don't work. However, I'll tell you, if someone showed me a study that was well designed and the
I
methodology
changed
and
my mind
everything was
too.
good, that showed that they worked, I would change my opinion immediately.
I completely agree. That's exactly
Yeah.
that's my thinking too. Is like that means that if such a study came out and it was really utterly convincing, high quality, I couldn't find any thing where I'd say, well, yeah, like it's a reasonable study. I'd say it's a reasonable study. Then I would change my mind and then I'd go back to the drawing board on the physics of it. Maybe
Right, and go and find out what mistake you made in the theory. Right,
Yeah.
absolutely, I agree 100% on that. Okay, well, I guess we've gone over this a lot. This isn't a very important thing to go over because this is one of the big problems. Is that some people would not admit that they were wrong when the evidence was overwhelming on a lot of this stuff.
Yeah. But they're not doing science anymore. They're doing something else.
Yeah.
Dogma.
Now I'm having trouble going. Okay, next. Okay, so what was this? Oh, that was just more of the same. And now this is the one about figuring out that the vaccines were not blocking transmission very early, right? A month after they were out. And here's the screenshot from, you see it says January 24th there?
Yeah.
So on January 24th, the people that had watched my videos along the way, about 1,000 people, 1,200 this time, were asking me if we can get infected and spread the virus after we've been vaccinated. Why are the airlines saying blah, blah, blah? So they already have accepted that I showed them and proved to them that the vaccines were not blocking transmission. So the question is, how did I figure out, or what did I need to know? Let's put it that way. What did I need to know to be able to figure it out? One of them is you had to have a graph of the cases versus time before and after the vaccine rollout. Because what I wanted to show was that the rate of reduction in spread was not high enough to say that the vaccines were blocking. Okay? There should be a reduction in the rate of spread. Do you agree if the vaccines are working?
Yeah, although you have to have the right counterfactual, right? So like if you have let's say the vaccines come out during a wave, which they did, like they were rolled out in late December 2020 during a major winter wave of cases in the northern hemisphere.
Now I used Israel, and theirs were released on December 20th.
Right. So there's a major wave of cases going on in Israel as they release the vaccine.
Right.
The vaccine then, even if it 100% blocked transmission, still wouldn't block the wave because the vaccine rollout didn't vaccinate everyone all at once. It took months and months to do that.
Yeah. If you
So,
look at if you look at the rest of the things I needed to know, I cover that too. You know, you need to know the percent vaccinated versus time. So that tells you how fast the vaccines are coming out.
Yeah. So
and the percent of vaccines that were duds too. You had to know that.
So you have to
I got all this information.
You have to ask what would have happened absent the vaccine, and it's not that you would have gotten no. You have to have some counterfactual. It's actually a hard empirical question, Reed. So it's not simply, you can't just look at, cases kept going up after the vaccine rolled out. Not everyone is vaccinated. We are in the middle of a major wave. The wave means that the virus is transmitting in society, even though there may be vaccinated people. You have to measure it relative to some counterfactual, compare it against a country that isn't vaccinated that's similar, or you know, I mean, I think you have to have some kind of careful empirical work. You can't just look at Israel by itself. What you can say, though, looking at heavily vaccinated places, and I mean, this was clear by spring, a lot of heavily vaccinated places were continuing to see waves.
Yes, right.
And so what that means is that the vaccine doesn't stop transmission. That you can conclude with certainty.
But you see where I'm coming from here? In other words, there was even in a big wave that was happening, if you check the cases versus time right before the vaccines came out, and you know the percent vaccinated versus time, you ought to be able, and you know there's other factors.
I mean, in principle, you could do that. But that's a complicated empirical analysis.
I'll tell you, it's very complicated. I had to look at derivatives of the curves as the derivatives change.
The thing is, you can't look just at the before, because before you're at the beginning of a wave.
Yeah. It was fairly mature on December 20th, though. So in other words, I was able to see a mature wave, a graph of a mature wave, and then the rollout came. And I remember Israel was very efficient at getting them into the arms. And I expected to see on the wave that was right before the rollout, I expected to see a reduction in the rate of cases that were being formed, even in the middle of a wave. Yeah, I tell you, you're right. It was very complex, and I could have been lucky here. But I'll tell you, I have experience with something very similar to this before, and that's when I used to count cards. And I'll tell you that in just a second. I won't go into counting cards, but
can I just say, like, so that I think from the kind of evidence you're saying, you can infer that the vaccine doesn't stop transmission.
Yeah.
But you can't infer that the vaccine doesn't reduce transmission, or even substantially reduce transmission. For that, what you need is careful cohort studies.
Yeah.
Studies where people track people that are vaccinated, matched with similar people who've been who aren't vaccinated,
right,
tracked over time to measure the incidence of infection.
Yes.
Now, in principle, the randomized trial could have done this.
Mm-hmm.
The randomized trial, but they didn't actually look at that. So this is why in December 2020 or November 2020, when I read the trial, I couldn't tell whether the vaccine was going to stop transmission because they didn't check for that.
In the original trials, yeah.
Yeah. So, but when there were these preprints that started coming out of places like Qatar, that did these careful cohort studies, and they were finding that within 3 or 4 months, the vaccine efficacy against infection dropped pretty sharply, like 10 down to 10-20%. That's when it was clear to me that that actually nails it. It's not enough to look at the macro data correlate with vaccination rates in countries. You really want these cohort studies. Those cohort studies basically killed the idea that you could vaccinate your way out of this pandemic.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, okay. Well, maybe I was lucky then. I mean, I hate to say that because
Well, no, I think you had a theory based on some important data.
Yeah.
That doesn't stop transmission. That theory turned out to be correct when it was but when there were more rigorous empirical tests imposed later. You had an excellent hypothesis, a plausible hypothesis in January. Not lucky. That's your physical reasoning and your scientific intuition.
Yeah.
And
it was, go ahead. Sorry.
So I wouldn't call that luck. I would call that an important application of your scientific intuition. I think, to me, scientifically, you want to still test that, and the real test of it started to come with the cohort studies. Now, I will say, even the cohort studies are not definitive. Ideally, again, we want a randomized trial here. I really wish the randomized trials that had been run in 2020 had checked for transmission. That would have nailed the question.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing. When I did this, of course, I wasn't able to say 100% that I'm right. I was deriving a probability that this kind of lack of reduction in spread that I was getting.
You generated a hypothesis, right? So that's I mean, it's not that you can, I mean, we don't know what the denominator of such a probability would be, but you're saying, look, this is a plausible hypothesis that suggests that you're not going to get elimination of the disease based on the vaccine. That turned out to be correct, obviously. So that's I guess I characterize this differently.
Yeah. Well, see this thing down here on the bottom. As I was doing this, I couldn't see the trend for about 20 days in Israel. And when 20 days came around, it was pretty clear to me that the vaccines were not blocking transmission.
Yeah.
And I wrote here that on January 10th, there was about a 95% chance the vaccines were not blocking transmission, but I still wasn't willing to admit it. But then when I got 5 more days of a lack of reduction at the rate expected, and remember, you need to know the percent that has immunity in place. You need to know the way that they rolled the vaccine out. Did they give it to older people first who would have more immunity in place because they're older than a 10-year-old kid that might not have gotten the cross reactivity yet, right? So you needed to know those, and I looked them up and got them, and then applied this issue of using calculus to figure it out with the slopes of the curves not reducing quick enough, and made this call. And I was getting, out of the calculations, I was getting percentages that I was, let me tell you the negative way. There was only about a 5% chance on January 10th that the lack of reduction in transmission rate was not due to the vaccines not working, if you will, right?
Yeah.
And then on January 15th, the thing had gone to less than 1% chance that it was not happening because of randomization instead of because the vaccines weren't transmitting.
Yeah.
If you see what I mean. And that's when I made the call on the 15th. I said, these things aren't blocking transmission. There's hardly any reduction in the rate of spread. There should be a much bigger reduction. It's just not happening.
I mean, that's obviously turned out to be right.
Yeah.
It was a good hypothesis.
Yeah. Okay. Well, anyway, let's go on to the next thing. I mean, because you know, if my intuition was right, but my reasoning, if I went over the line on the reasoning a little bit, it's still not very valuable. That's what I meant by being
I
left.
don't,
But
I
I'll
know,
tell you, I don't
I
think I
think
was. I was
I don't think your
really,
reasoning was wrong here.
yeah.
The issue is like,